Hi, Nan Jensen here. This is going to be video number 10, which is the second part about trusts, and hopefully the last video in the Preparing for Adulthood series. Before I get started, here's my disclaimer. These videos contain information only. They do not contain legal advice. If you need legal advice, you need to talk to a lawyer. You need to tell them your whole situation, and you need to get a letter of engagement. Do not rely on anything you hear here. This is information only, general information. You need to get specific advice for your own situation. Okay, so the topic for today, as I said, is trust, and I just want to continue on from the last video, which was getting too long. So in the last video, I talked about the vocabulary of trust and a little bit about the history of trust, and now I want to just mention a few more things, like how you can use a trust to benefit a person with a disability, how do assets get into the trust, and also be sure that we understand what types of trusts we're talking about. So the first thing I want to talk about is, just to be clear, we're talking about a discretionary trust, or some people call it a discretionary family trust. We're not talking about a charitable trust. You've probably heard of a charitable trust. Those trusts have to have one of 4 charitable purposes. They can last forever. They're also run by trustees, but this is not the type of trust we're talking about today. There are other types of trusts that are somewhat discretionary, but not really, because they have very specific terms. So for example, there may be a trust that says this trust is specifically for the education of these 2 children. There's nothing wrong with that type of trust, but it's very narrow in its purpose. So let's say that one child dies, unfortunately, and the other one finishes their education and there's still assets left in the trust. The trustees can't do anything with it because the purpose is so narrow, and they can't go outside the rules of the trust. So that's not the type of trust we're talking about here. Another example of a non-discretionary type of trust would be the type where it says that everybody who's a beneficiary of this trust gets $100 a month. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. That might be really great, but of course, if you're on a benefit and you're a beneficiary, then that income may be looked at by WINS, and then they may deduct something from your benefit, so that could cause inadvertent problems. And again, nothing wrong with it, but that's not the type of trust we're talking about. We're talking about a discretionary trust, and it's called discretionary because it gives the trustees the discretion to decide which, if any, which beneficiaries, if any, are going to get any benefits from the trust in any given year, and to decide how and what, and so on and so forth. So you could be a beneficiary of a discretionary trust and never receive anything, because it is at the discretion of the trustees. Now, why would you have a trust? So there's a lot of reasons to have trusts, and people have all different reasons for doing it. I think one of the best reasons is to protect a vulnerable family member. So that could be someone with a disability. It could also be someone with a mental health issue, or a gambling problem, or an alcohol or drug problem. There's all different ways that people are vulnerable. And it can also allow for a certain amount of flexibility in managing family assets. So there are a number of good reasons, and I don't have time to discuss all of them, but I do think that protecting vulnerable people from predators is one of the best reasons. And unfortunately, there are a lot of predators out there who are looking to get stuff from vulnerable people. Now, it's not going to be very easy to protect the little things like the iPad or the iPhone. If someone convinces your family member to give that away, you probably can't do much about it, but it does protect big things. So if I have a house in my name and someone convinces me that they're my boyfriend, and they, we have a relationship, and then that goes to pieces, then I could lose half the house in a relationship property claim. It would be harder, not impossible, but harder for the person to make that claim if I didn't own that house, because the house was owned by a trust and I was just living in it as a beneficiary. So that's one example. The other thing is, if someone just tried to convince me that I should give them the house, or I should sell it to them at some ridiculously low price, again, I wouldn't be able to sign those documents and go through with that transaction, because I didn't own the house. So that's a way that it can be beneficial to a disabled person. I can't go into all sorts of details about what other ways it could be beneficial, but there are a lot of ways that a trust can be helpful for protecting people with disabilities. Now, how does property get into a trust? There are three main ways. One of them is that you can gift it in. So if you just want to put some money in so that, I don't know, so the trust can do some investing or something, then you can just gift that in. Property normally would need to be purchased by the trust. So the trust might buy the property, but if it doesn't have any money to do that, then you might have to lend the money to the trust and then you would gift it back. And your lawyer can explain all about that. The third way is an inheritance. So we talked, I think in the last video, about talking to your family members who may be thinking of giving your child a legacy, and perhaps talking to them about leaving that money to your family trust if you have one. The other way they can do it if you don't have a trust and you don't want to set one up is they can actually set up what's called a will trust and have the money left to the person in the will. The problem with the will trust is that, again, that person's the only beneficiary. In the situation with a family trust, there may be a lot of beneficiaries in the trust, so that may be preferable. And again, this is something to discuss with a lawyer. But that can be an important conversation to have with your family members. Similarly, if you are making a will, it's very simple. It's a lot easier if you have a family trust to simply leave everything after your funeral and your debts are paid. You just leave it all to the family trust, and then the trustees can determine how that will be distributed to your family members. And it gives more flexibility about how, when, in what form than if you give it away in the will. Now, if you have a trust, you also probably will want to give away the power of appointment of trustees and possibly the power of appointment of beneficiaries if you have those powers. So it depends on what it says in the trust deed, but if you have those powers, then you can give those away in the will as well. Normally, it all depends on what it says in the trust deed. What else? Yes, so I know it's going to sound like I'm trying to sell lawyer services. I really do think it's a good idea to have your trust arrangements reviewed regularly, particularly if you have somebody else managing your trust. A professional like a lawyer and accountant, because they may be managing many trusts and they don't have time to sit and look at them all the time unless you ask them to. I think it's a good idea because trust law changes all the time. It changes through the common law, which means through cases, and we find that I often find people come to me with a trust and the trust isn't working for the best benefit of their disabled person. Sometimes it's working directly against that person's interests, and often it has provisions that really are not good to have at this point in time because of the developments in the law. So, for example, I've had people come in and discover that their ex-partner is a beneficiary of the trust and they didn't realize it because they just hadn't looked at things in a long time. And whereas that may not have been a big deal years ago, at this stage, beneficiaries have more and more rights. So nowadays we do often try to limit who the beneficiaries are to whoever's necessary. The Trusts Act was passed earlier this year. I was going to wait to do these videos until I had been through them very carefully and absorbed all the new provisions. I've decided not to do that because it's taking some time to understand what's in the law and to understand which things are binding and which things are not, because there are a number of provisions that actually are overridden by what might be in the trust deed. So right now, all I can tell you is that in the future, these types of trusts will be able to last for 125 years. Previously, that's been 80 years. But the good thing is this law doesn't come into effect until the beginning of 2022. So we have a bit of time to learn about it, and I will update these videos when I've got more information. The other thing that I already mentioned is that beneficiaries are having more and more rights, and I can see that the Act does give them more and more. So again, all of these issues really need to be discussed very thoroughly with a lawyer, and it's really important that you find a lawyer who understands how WINS provisions interact with the trust things, because WINS are trying to look very hard into trusts, and it's not just about the rest home subsidy. Some of those rules are the same, but it's also about understanding how it affects a person who is on a disability type of benefit. So that's about all I have to say about that. I hope these videos have been useful. Please share the Facebook page and or the link to the YouTube channel so that lots of people can get the benefit of watching these videos. My next project is to prepare a number of videos on these same topics for people with cognitive disabilities. I will need feedback from people with cognitive disabilities about those, so please help me with that effort. Thanks very much. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.